Hi there, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Chatting with the Lightkeeper. As always, I'm Edward, and we are digging our way through the series here, 2024 of BDSM Odyssey. And this week, when we get there, we're going to chat about consent and the lifestyle. Consent seems like it's probably a pretty straightforward thing to many people. I mean, either yes you can or no you can't. But it really is something that we do need to talk about. I'll explain why when we get there. But before we get there, I just wanted to share a couple of really exciting things that happened to me this week, both actually related to this podcast, which is not really surprising, but really kind of made my day. The first one happened. I was out and about, and I literally didn't really run into, but was out to dinner with some friends. And as I was leaving, my friends and I had sort of separated. We were going different directions out of the restaurant. It was just a meet for dinner type thing, and we were all on our way. And as I was leaving, the one of the staff there said, "Excuse me, can I ask you something?" And it was in a quiet place of the restaurant. There was no one around, so it was done very nicely, very discreetly, very at ease, I guess, for everyone. And they asked me if I recorded a podcast because my voice sounded very familiar to them. And I said that yes, I did have a podcast. And they simply thanked me for it and said they really enjoyed it. And it was really, I don't know, it made me feel good. My first reaction was like kind of weirded out, I'll be honest, a little weirded out because I never expected that to happen. But I'm glad it did. And it was really done so well. By the person who approached me, they, did it in such a way that even if Vanilla Ears had heard the whole conversation, there was nothing that would have been offensive or embarrassing or any of that stuff for anybody who would have overheard it. And so it was reassuring to me, I guess, in a way, that we can have polite, discreet mentions of the lifestyle without causing any chance of offending somebody somewhere. And it was just, of course, it made me feel fantastic that somebody would approach me and recognize what I do, and that they enjoyed it. So that, of course, was very nice. But I have to say, there was something else that happened podcast related that really made me smile, much more than even that, if you can believe it. But one listener out there, and they didn't say I could share who they were or share what they shared with me. So I'm not going to do that here. But no matter where you listen, you can send me a little voice message that is limited to a minute. But one of you out there in listener land took the time to write a little poem for me and shared it voice wise, and it was just very, very awesome. So thank you. You know who you are. So I want to thank you for that. And if you do want to interact with me, please feel free. You can do it no matter what platform you listen through. And you can be as anonymous as you want with it. But I do want to sincerely thank the person who left the poem that I don't have permission to share with you all. Or I honestly would because I thought it was amazing. But without that permission, I'm not going to do it. And unfortunately, the one thing is if you don't leave a way for me to respond to you through the voice messages, like an email or a social media handle, or a FetLife ID, I don't like I don't know how to get back to you. It could be me being incompetent, looking at the tools I have available, or it just simply doesn't exist. Um, somehow I'm betting it's me being incompetent. But you know, I've looked high and low. I've asked Google, and Google was no help. So anyway, that's kind of the excitement there. The other, I don't know whether it's really exciting news or not. Another little mini winter storm is bearing down on my fair city as I record this. So tomorrow is going to be a hellish travel day for me. I'm going to enjoy about 6 inches of snow mixed with some freezing rain, which really just makes, it really complements the mess that snow brings. The freezing rain, so everything is coated in ice. And so tomorrow, with I actually have to make an appearance in the office. I have to people tomorrow, so I think we'll be cranking up the old Paul Simon and listening to Slip Sliding Away as I budget. Um, Probably 2 hours for my 40-minute, 45-minute without traffic commute. I think 2 hours would be safe in case the weather is as bad as what they say it could be. So that's the excitement here. And once again, thank you for the kindness that a couple of listeners shared with me this week. I'm humbled and just smiling too, humbled and happy. So let's move on into this week's episode and let's talk about consent. Um, the thing about consent is everything in the lifestyle happens with consent. And if it doesn't have consent, it is not BDSM. It isn't. You can put whatever words you want into it if it doesn't have consent. It could be abuse. It could be rape. It could be much worse. Um, and I hate to use those words because they're traumatic, they're triggers, and they're just horrible. And really, there's no reason why we should have those in society. I mean, as humans, let's face it, we know better. And it's disgusting to me that we don't do better. So, okay, I'm gonna put away my soapbox and just try to stay on the topic here today. But everything that happens within the lifestyle is consensual. Um, whether it's a power exchange, whether it's a spanking scene, whether it's hey, I like you, let's meet for coffee. Everything happens with consent. And why it is so important that we talk about consent in the lifestyle is that the National Coalition for Sexual Freedom, they do research, they do studies, they do a whole heck of a lot. And their research has shown that 1 in 5, that's 20%, 20%, think about this, 20% of the people that you've interacted with in the lifestyle. Maybe you're new and you're just getting started, but still, it doesn't take long to interact with 20 different people. It happens pretty quickly. If you move from the sort of sitting back and observing to even just casually participating here and there, even online, you interact pretty quickly with 20 people. Or, well, I'm sorry, with 5 people, and one of those 5 is going to have their consent violated. Um, and we also tend to think of when we hear consent violations, I think the default thing that comes to mind is that the person in the submissive role had their consent violated. Or you're going to, unfortunately, we are going to assume that the person who had their consent violated um, is someone who is submissive, or uh, they are female, or they are transgender. They are somehow, I don't know, not protected by the magic shield of identifying being a CIS man who has the magic shield of a penis. But the thing is, consent violations happen regardless of gender, they happen regardless of role, and they happen far too frequently. Yes, in the lifestyle are consent violations less than out in the vanilla world. Yes, they are. Now, does that mean we should throw a party and celebrate and say, woohoo, over here in the lifestyle, we are doing better? No, because 20%, that's way too much, in my opinion. We need to do better. This isn't throw a party thing. Um, and speaking of that, just real quickly to get back to it, yes, especially if you are a submissive uh, or a CIS man, you do need to be much more careful with your interactions, be much more careful with consent. Because, yes, statistically, more bad things are potential to happen to you than to happen to a guy. But if you are a male, CIS male dom, you need to be aware that it can happen to you, and it does happen to dominants. Um, they just don't like to talk about it because, let's face it, um, when dominants do share bad experiences, somehow there's like judgment, like, oh, well, if they were a real dom, it wouldn't have happened to them. And it happens. So it does happen, and it's just not talked about. It's talked about in hushes and whispers, and bad things happen. So consent is key to all of this. And in order to keep all of us safe, we really need to practice consent. Um, and the easiest way that I've found to talk about consent is to talk about the fries method. And if you live in the United States, fries is a very common food. It's very easy to remember because every time you go through a fast food restaurant, and even if you're a healthy eater who hasn't had fast food in, you know, years, you still know the drill because the drill hasn't changed. At least I don't think so. I actually haven't been through a fast food drive-through in quite a while, but I have had fries. But when you go through an American drive-through, no matter what you order, if you don't order the French fries, they will ask, "Do you want fries with that?" And a quick note: when I graduated college, my degree is in history. Um, I got this T-shirt made up, and it had a picture of um, Beavis and Butthead on the back. They were um, like fast food employees in the cartoon series. Then I know they've rebooted Beavis and Butthead, so I don't know if they have jobs in the reboot. But back then they were fast food employees, and on the front of it, it said, had my university logo, and then it said, you know, what does a degree in history from university logo get you to or qualify you to do? And on the back it had Beavis and Butthead, and Beavis say, "Would you like fries with that?" So yeah, my mom was not thrilled with that bit of wardrobe. And in fact, I have a feeling that when I did laundry here one time, it disappeared because I never saw it again. So I have a feeling that it met its demise. But anyways, enough about Beavis and Butthead and French fries. The fries method for consent is it's easy to understand, it's easy to remember, and it's so very important. First of all, we have the F for freely given. Consent must be freely given. And this is very important. And this goes both ways, not just for submissives, but for dominants as well. Um, because there are people who will try to coerce you into doing things, or they will apply pressure. Oh, if you loved me, you'd do this. Or, pretty please, would you do this? I really want you to do this. It means so much to me if you would do this for me. Even if you're saying no, they're still trying to convince you to do something. And at that point, that is a signal that this person does not value your consent and you need to step away. Because when we have consent that is freely given, it really empowers us to express not only things that we want, like if I have a relationship with a wonderful submissive, which I hope to have someday again, um, where I can say, I would like this, and I would be empowered to know that they're going to be honest with me when they respond, whether yes, they would like that too, or not so fast, my friend. That's not something I'm comfortable with. The other thing about fries, when we move on from the F, we go to the R, and it's reversible. At any point in time, anybody who's involved can say, hold it, stop. Um, I'm not comfortable. I don't want to continue. Or hold it, stop. I've got to use the bathroom. Whatever. It's reversible. You can revoke your consent at any time for any reason, and it's done in a judgment-free way. When consent is, hey, stop. We need to stop. I'm not, whatever the reason, not comfortable. Need a break. Whatever it is, where consent is withdrawn. It's done without any judgment. And in fact, really, this might seem counterintuitive, but to me, that's a moment that, as a dominant with a submissive partner, that I celebrate because it's awesome. It's awesome that they feel so comfortable that they can say, "Hey, let's hit the brakes here. Let's stop." And yeah, that's something to be celebrated because going forward, it makes it easier to stop when there's something that's not feeling right. So it's reversible at any point, at any time, and without judgment. There will be no negative judgments for stopping things. Now, the I is for informed, and that is when we are consenting to things, we know what we're consenting to. And in the lifestyle, there is typically um, a it's sort of put on the dominant partner to clearly explain what the activities are, what any potential risks are, and really any other important information the submissive should know. It's sort of like that is put on to the dominant partner to explain if it's something, say, new. Um, and yes, I believe that a dominant should do all of that. However, I also believe that a submissive responsibility is more than just taking what was shared with them before they agree to consent. And they take the responsibility, just as the dominant did, say if it's a new thing, to research it, understand it, know the risk, that the submissive do the same thing. It's wonderful that you trust your partner. It's wonderful that you trust your dominant 100%, or if you're a dominant and you're submissive that is wanting to do something new, that you trust them 100%, but still do your own homework so that you are informed, that you understand everything. Um, and then having informed consent, this helps partners have open discussions about, you know, I would do, X and Y, but not Z of what we want to do. It helps you have those conversations so you can make informed decisions. And then next up is enthusiastic. Um, it means that everyone who is involved is genuinely wanting to participate. Um, I've had an interesting conversation about this being called enthusiastic um, by a person who is on the autism spectrum. And they were very upset that I referred to being enthusiastic as part of the consent process, as part of this fries model. And this is not mine. I, it's just what I prefer to use. But they were upset that I was talking about enthusiastic because where they are on the spectrum, they do not feel enthusiasm the way that, for example, I would feel enthusiasm. And as we talked about it, um, what I was trying to say is that you are wanting to do this with your partner. It's not about being able to display the enthusiasm, for example, the way that perhaps I might, but that you genuinely want to engage in this with your partner. Uh, it's not. it wasn't necessarily about how you display it, but a genuine willingness, wanting to do this with your partner, not the how you express that to your partner. But anyways, neither here nor there. It was a agree to disagree thing. But being enthusiastic, meaning that you are genuinely wanting to participate in this project. Um, and there is a difference between passive agreement and enthusiasm. If your partner's like, well, no, I guess maybe, in my book, that doesn't pass the standard of consent. That means no matter what your role, this needs to be put on hold because your partner isn't ready. If um, they are not truly, genuinely, wanting to do it, but they might do it because they know you want it, but they really feel uncomfortable about doing this, then it's a no-go. Don't don't do it. You really don't have consent. Um, and finally, we get to the last S. Or I guess, it would be the only S in fries. Do you understand why spelling was hard for me in school? Anyway, it's specific in that consent is specific. You know, I want to do A, B, and C. And your partner says, I'll do A and C. And then you negotiate A and C and how it's going to all work. Specific. Everything needs to be clear. Everything needs to be communicated. And everything needs to be negotiated. There needs to be no 50 shades of gray areas. Everything, when it comes to consent, is negotiated and it is very black and white. And if it's a gray area, that means you don't have consent and that's a no-go. It's quite, quite simple, but yet also quite complicated in the moment. Um, with consent, of course, it takes a lot of honest communication. You have to be able to communicate openly and honestly with your partner or partners, or even if it's just a friends with benefits type relationship. You need to be able to communicate clearly what you want, what you don't want, what you will do, what you won't do. I mean, in a way, you are singing Meatloaf. You'll do anything for love, or maybe just friends with benefits. But that was too long. It doesn't fit the song. But you won't do that. So you need to communicate. Negotiations need to happen. And when I say negotiation, because we talk about negotiating consent, right? This isn't okay, you want to do A, B, and C. I want to do X, Y, and Z. So we'll do A if you do X. And if you do X, I'll give you. That is not how negotiations happen. Really, negotiating consent is kind of a misconception. What you are doing is you are communicating your boundaries and your limits. And you are communicating, obviously, much more than that. But you are saying, we can do this and we won't do that. It is not about, if you give me this, I'll give you that. It is not a trade off type scenario. Consent is, black and white, clearly defining what can and what won't happen during a scene. And consent is not something that happens um, just before you engage in a scene or before you play with somebody. It's not. It's not you have the consent conversation and then head to the bedroom and we're done. We don't need to revisit consent. Especially if you are new to either the lifestyle or new with a partner or new with a friend with benefits or whatever word you want to playmate, whatever word you want to put on it. If you are new and you don't have that long term jam going on where you get each other and you get each other, all of that stuff. Um, Consent. continues with check-ins. How are you doing? Is this too hard? Is this too soft? Would you like more of this? Or the simple, are you doing okay? And that goes both ways. Not only should dominance in a new situation be checking in, uh, submissives also, it's okay to ask your dom, are you doing okay? Are you feeling okay? Um, Another thing about consent is once the yumminess of play begins, what you've agreed to before moving into the bedroom or wherever room you are playing in, uh, whatever you agreed to beforehand, that is locked in. And I say that because when we start to mess around and we start to get the ball rolling and things start to feel good, those it's feeling good emotions, thoughts, things that are going on in our minds, those are our bodies sending chemicals to our brain that say this is awesome, this feels good. And those same chemicals that are saying this is awesome and this feels good, um, they make us more agreeable, sort of. Um, in a way, they're intoxicating chemicals our brain gives to us, all on our own. We don't need to use any outside help. We don't need a bottle of wine or whatever your choice would be in intoxicants. Um, all of that is happening internal in our minds. So once we start engaging in play, we become much more agreeable to things we wouldn't have agreed to before playtime. So the consent conversation, while during play, it is great and in my mind, expected to check in, especially newer or new partners or new playmates. Those check-ins need to happen, but consent doesn't change. What was agreed to beforehand, that's the box. This enjoyable period of explorations are going to stay within. They are not going to go out of that box. And yes, um, for the most part, that does fall on the dominant shoulders to keep the enjoyable time within that box. But also, submissives have a responsibility if they feel that the play is starting to push the limits of that box. Use your ability to revoke consent and stop things, even if it's to stop to just pause, have a breath, and sort of collect our thoughts and carry back on. So it's very important that once things start happening, there can't be any new new things added. We can do new things next time or whenever that is, but that particular negotiated play session is locked into its consent box. Um, Also, with consent, while we have our conversations about consent, there's also we have to understand safe words, safe gestures in all of this. They are really the backstop for safety. When anyone says a safe word during during a scene or during play, uh, typically, when we say safe word, it's a red safe word, which means stop. When that safe word is said, it's slamming on the brakes, everything stops. There are other people out there that do typically, and most people in lifestyle do have, like a traffic light. They have a yellow safe word and a red safe word. Yellow means, we're pushing the bounds of what is comfortable. I'm letting you know you're getting close to boundaries. And of course, red is stop immediately. This is, something is off. Either we've pushed too close to a boundary, I'm not comfortable, um, I really need to pee, um, I'm having a heart attack. I mean, any crazy reason, or hey, I just noticed your grandma walking up the sidewalk, and it looks like she's bringing us cookies, and you are hanging from the ceiling in the living room. We need to stop right now. Whatever it is, safe words can communicate caution, or they can communicate stop. And in addition to safe words, when it comes to play, it's important to have gestures that are very easily interpreted. Let's face it, sometimes when we are engaging in play, especially in BDSM, there, for example, may be something in somebody's mouth that makes communication harder verbally. So you have safe gestures. These gestures could be rapping on the headboard. They could be, giving a signal like a baseball umpire. Whatever works for you, these gestures work in place of verbal signals, which, as I said, in lifestyle play, there are times when there might be things in mouths, and yeah, these gestures allow for that same level of safety and consent to happen when the verbal ability is restrained. So when we talked about checking it, it was way back in the day when I was still in college, um, and I had met this wonderful young submissive. And we had been dating for a little while, and we decided to do a little play on a Friday night, and it was going to be our first time incorporating anything kinktastic into what we did. And we had the consent negotiations. We talked about what we wanted to do, and it was very much a mutual. We want to do this, that, and the other thing together. And as the night went along, because we were new to each other, and I was newer to the lifestyle, she was slightly more experienced at various points. Are you doing okay? Is this okay? Harder, softer? Those little check-ins happened. And after we got done, the next day we had a conversation, and she's like, "I don't think you're dominant." And I'm like, "Why do you say that?" She's like, "Well, when we were playing last night, you asked me if I was okay, and you double checked that you could do what we talked about beforehand that I had already consented to." And I'm like, "Well, as things went along, you may have changed your mind. I'm new to you, you're new to me. I don't have a firm grasp on your nonverbal communications, and I just wanted to make sure that you were comfortable." And it was a very interesting conversation, um, because she didn't think of it from my perspective that I was ensuring her comfort and her happiness, by doing it all this way. That I was somehow less domly, because I was checking in. And it's very important to understand that when check-ins happen, it isn't uh, because if you're submissive, because your dominant partner is less dominant. They're actually showing that they are a caring partner, and they're checking in because they care about you. So don't ever feel that check-ins somehow mitigate um, a person's dominance. In fact, it, in my opinion, shows that they are indeed caring about your welfare. When we also do talk about consent, um, this has to be said. You should never play with anybody in the lifestyle unless you trust them, because there is so much that can go wrong. So if you don't trust them, don't play with them. Um, Please make intelligent, informed choices. Please don't ever run off and meet somebody new in a hotel room. Don't run off and meet somebody you've never met at their home. Uh, don't put yourself in bad situations. Don't overshare personal information. Take it slow. Uh, be safe. Uh, be able to discuss your boundaries and listen to their discussion of their boundaries. Know your limits, your hard and soft limits. A soft limit is something that you would consider doing, but it's not something you're going to consider potentially doing right away or ever. Maybe with the right partner in the right situation, 5 years in, you might consider doing that. Um, but right now, it's a limit. Right now, it's a no go. And hard limits are those things that we believe are never, ever, ever is going to happen. We don't want them to happen. We don't, they're not our jam. This is not my jam. Now, limits, soft and hard, can change over time. We're human. We're always evolving. So please understand that limits can change. Hard and soft both can change. But when we have those discussions about consent and building trust and all of that, these are areas that a consenting, caring partner would respect. They wouldn't try to get you to change. They would embrace and accept them. Another thing when we're talking about safety and we're talking about consent in the lifestyle, and this is something that is not easy to talk about often with people. We need to talk about potential triggers. If we are planning to have a Friday night playtime, you need to be able to share, if what is being discussed, you if it's something that you think might maybe cause a trigger, you need to talk about it. And triggers can be small or they can be big things. I know it's something I've shared before. Um, Getting to know a prospective person, they shared that, um, you know, the use of a wooden spoon would be a trigger. And it was something that they know that I liked, but it would be a trigger for them. Um, it's little things like that. And when a person shares their triggers with you, I think it's important to just accept their trigger. If they want to share more about why it's a trigger, obviously we are caring humans and caring beings. We're going to care and listen and actively listen and hear them. But at the same time, it's a trigger. And if they don't want to say any more, then we accept that they don't want to talk about it, that even talking about the trigger could be a trigger. And we don't want to do that because, like I said, everybody who listens to this is an awesome, caring person. So we're going to care. There are a few misconceptions, as always, that apply to consent in BDSM, and I'd be remiss if we didn't touch on how these wonderful, wonderful bits of misinformation, or I guess we're getting into political campaign season, so I can use one of my favorite words again, alternative facts about BDSM impact trust. Um, the first alternative fact that we will have is that because BDSM involves power exchange, it is inherently something that can't be consented to. So no matter what, no one can give consent because of the power exchange makes consent moot. And that is not the case at all. Boundaries, roles, all of that, a submissive can consent, a submissive can not consent, a dominant can choose to not consent to doing something, or they can choose to consent to it. No matter what your role is, um, you do have the ability to consent. And plus, it's BDSM. Not everybody who's here is here for the power exchange. Hello. They could just be here for the kinky sex. And there's nothing wrong with that. So it's important to understand that that misconception or alternative fact is just junk and needs to get thrown out the window. Another one, and this is something you will more than often see from an undereducated or predatory person who is taking the role of a dominant. And this should be a red flag, and a red flag that says run, run away. Now I have flock of seagulls. I ran so far away in my head, and I'm sorry, I sang. I hope you don't mind. But that these people will believe that consent in BDSM is one time. Like you consent one time and it's irrevocable. You consented to me spanking you, therefore I can spank you whenever I want to. Mm-mm. You consented to spanking in that one scene last Friday night. That doesn't mean you can spank them Saturday morning. It just doesn't work that way. Consent is not a one-time deal. Consent is an ongoing process and, as we all know, is revocable at any time for any reason. So there's complete misconception there. And it's also a red flag. One that if you do run across anybody who acts like that, talks like that, believes that, run. Run away from them. Um, and of course, we have those out there in the vanilla world who have the alternative fact about BDSM that the lifestyle is inherently violent or abusive. And anytime you have violence or abuse, you don't have consent, right? Because let's face it, people who are abusers or being abused, unfortunately, those types of relationships, there is no consent. But BDSM is consensual. Without consent, yes, it is violent. Yes, it can be abusive. Um, but when there isn't consent, it is not BDSM. So it's very important to understand that everything that happens in the lifestyle happens with consent. Now, speaking of consent and all of that, and how people sometimes will have the alternative fact that it's abusive, it is important to understand uh, there can be legal repercussions to consent and the lifestyle. Now, I am not an attorney and I don't play one on TV, but it is important to understand um, that consent legally is not a defense for what happens. Where this does tend to be more of a problem are in conservative areas where being different, for example, involved in BDSM, can cause you problems. Uh, Even if you engaged in consensual spanking, a conservative person, even if with consent, may say that they witnessed an assault. You were assaulting them by spanking their bottom. And even though they were consenting, typically, even like in the United States, you cannot consent to being assaulted. You can, so legally, once again, this is something that you would primarily butt up against in a conservative area rather than a more liberal area, but it can happen anywhere. Um, say somebody looks in your window and you're spanking your submissive, and they call 911 because they think they're seeing domestic abuse. The police come, and you're in a whole lot of trouble because they look in the window, they see that too, and the submissive would say, "No, it's I consented to it. I wanted to have this done to me." You know, you the law says you cannot consent to being assaulted. And assault is a very big, broad legal term that catches many, many things underneath of it. So just understand that consent is not a defense. Um, so it's very important to not only have consent, but also to think of the bigger picture and to how to protect yourself there, which we will get into later in the series 2024 BDSM Odyssey. But we're not going to go there tonight because we'll be here all night. I do want to share with you a couple of resources if you want to further dive into this, things that I think are fantastic. Of course, we have to start with Dossie Easton and Janet Hardy. The new Topping book and the new Bottoming book are both fantastic books. They're in hardcover, paperback, and I also believe audiobooks. So they're out there. If you haven't read them and you're curious about the lifestyle, I would definitely recommend those. And I also have kind of an old school recommendation. This book has been around for years and years and years. It is called Screw the Roses, Send Me the Thorns, and it's by Philip Miller and Molly Devine. Uh, both of those are, or all three of those are excellent primers. And when you look at the Dossie Easton and the Janet Hardy books, no matter what role you have, I highly recommend reading both. Um, if you're submissive, perhaps start with a new bottoming book. And if you're dominant, maybe start with a new topping book and read the next one. That helps you understand what's going on in the mind of the person on the other side of the slash. So highly recommend both of those books, no matter your role. If you don't want to read, but I'm a reader, so I like to read. But there are, online forums. There are places like FetLife where you can go and join discussions about all things Kinktastic. You can ask questions, you can share experiences, and of course, since it's the internet, anywhere you do that on the internet, you will also have to dodge a few trolls. But that's irregardless of the platform. Even if you have Kinktastic connections on Facebook, there's going to be some trolls there. So, it's the internet. What can I say? Um, and if you do live in an area where you have a local in-person kink community, consider getting involved there. Many communities have classes. Now, obviously, classes rotate, so if you're looking for something specific on consent, it might not be there this week, but it might next week or the week after. I know in my kind of extended community, I can go to a class pretty much every Monday through Thursday night if I wanted to. That they're there, they're offered, and when I say my extended community, this would involve probably a couple hours of driving for me, but it's all there. And one of the seriously good things that has come out of COVID is more and more groups are doing things online. They will have the in-person class, but they will also be streaming it live for people to take part that way. So even if you are in an area where there just isn't an in-person community, you can still connect and become part of an in-person community virtually. So that is absolutely wonderful. And finally, because consent does sometimes in this lifestyle have us where we have to face perhaps a past trigger or get over the hump with something that happened to us in the past. Sometimes it helps to get a little professional help to do so. And I don't think it's something that we should shy away from talking about. So I'm going to talk about it here. The National Coalition for Sexual Freedom. This is a United States group. They offer the ability to find kinky providers. Whether you're poly, whether you're the BDSM or poly and BDSM, whatever it is, they have a list of providers that you can search for so that you can get whatever help that you need and do so with a provider who is kink friendly. So if you need it, reach out and find that because we don't have to live in the we don't have to live in the shadows, and we don't have to shy away from having you know, having a practitioner in our life where we don't have to hide certain things like, oh wait, I can't say that because of, no, we can find people that respect the lifestyle choices that we made. So I hope you've enjoyed our journey through consent, and I hope you understand why it's so important that we have these conversations, especially since, we in the lifestyle have a 20% failure rate at consent, and that is not acceptable, and we need to do better. And it's kind of a little thing. I'm on a kick in 2024 that as much as I can, I will talk about consent. So if you follow my social media, you'll see things on consent, in addition to just this podcast. But please recognize just how important consent is. Never forget the fries method when you're doing it. Whenever you're playing, make sure you're playing with somebody who uses safe words. You understand the safe words, they understand your safe words and gestures, and that you trust them. That is so, so important. So, and don't forget, don't let the vanilla world and their alternative facts keep us from fully understanding the importance of consent in this lifestyle. And also, get out there and make connections in the lifestyle. Start building your own supportive, your unique to you BDSM community, whatever that looks like for you. Get out there and make a few connections in that. So I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank everybody for listening. And I do want to once again thank the person who asked me if I podcast. And I also once again sincerely thank you. And I'm totally humbled and so flattered, happy to the person that sent me the poem. It was beautiful. And once again, I apologize for not sharing it here because without permission, I didn't want to share without consent. It's funny, I didn't even think of it from that way until now. So without consent, I didn't want to do that. Um, I hope that you will tune in next week, where we are going to continue our 2024 BDSM Odyssey, and we're going to be exploring some of the different roles that are there in the lifestyle. So, no matter where you're listening, please don't forget to follow the podcast so you never miss an episode. And thank you again for listening, and I will chat with you next week.